The wind howled across the frozen plains, carrying shards of ice that stunk like needles against her exposed skin. She stumbled through the snow, her tattered coat offering little protection against the biting cold. Her name was Clara, a wanderer who'd fled a life of hardship in the city, seeking solace in the vast, unforgiving wilderness. Her boots crunched through the snowed drifts, each step heavier than the last, her breath shallow and ragged. The barn loomed ahead, a dark silhouette against the moonlit sky, its weathered planks promising shelter. She'd heard tales of the Apache rancher who owned this land, a man shrouded in whispers. Some called him a loner, others a savior. Her vision blurred as she reached the barn, collapsing against its rough wall, her fingers numb as they clawed at the door. The cold seeped into her bones, whispering promises of eternal rest if she surrendered. Her eyelids fluttered, the world fading, when a shadow moved in the darkness. Strong hands lifted her, and through her haze, she saw his fascia bronzed, weathered, with eyes like the desert night. He carried her through the storm, his footsteps steady, his breath warm against the frigid air. Inside his cabin, the warmth of a fire greeted her, the crackle of logs a stark contrast to the silence of the snow. He laid her on a bed of furs, his movements gentle but deliberate, as if he'd done this before. She stirred, her voice a faint croak, asking his name. "Thomas," he said, his voice low, like the rumble of distant thunder. The firelight danced on the walls, casting shadows that seemed to tell stories of their own. Clara's strength ebbed, but she felt safe, her body warming under the weight of the furs. Thomas watched her, his expression unreadable, a man shaped by the land and its secrets. Outside, the storm raged on, but within these walls, a fragile trust began to form, born of necessity and the shared instinct to survive. What had brought her here, to this moment, she couldn't fully grasp, but the rancher's presence anchored her to the world. She drifted into sleep, unaware of the mysteries that awaited, hidden in the heart of this isolated place. The night stretched on, the fire burning low, as Thomas sat vigil, his thoughts as guarded as the land he called home. Morning broke with the pale light filtering through the cabin's small window, the storm having spent its fury in the night. Clara awoke, her body aching but alive, the furs heavy and warm around her. The cabin was simple, its walls adorned with tools and woven blankets, each item telling a story of survival in this harsh land. Thomas was already up, tending the fire, his movements precise yet unhurried. She watched him, noting the strength in his hands, calloused from years of taming the wild. Her memory of the previous night was fragmented, running from something, or someone, the cold stealing her thoughts. She tried to sit up, wincing as pain shot through her limbs. Thomas turned, his dark eyes assessing her with a quiet intensity. He offered her a tin mug of steaming broth, its warmth spreading through her like a lifeline. "You're lucky," he said, his voice carrying the weight of someone who'd seen death too often. Clara sipped the broth, its earthy flavor grounding her, and asked why he'd helped her. He didn't answer directly, only gestured to the window, where the snow stretched endlessly. "No one survives out there alone," he said. She sensed there was more to his words, a history etched in the lines of his face. The cabin felt like a sanctuary, but questions gnawed at her. Why was she here, and what had she been running from? Her memories were a jigsaw puzzle, pieces missing, but the fear lingered, sharp and real. Thomas moved to a corner, pulling a blanket tighter around her shoulders, his touch brief but steady. She noticed a small carved figure on the table, an Apache symbol she didn't recognize, its lines intricate and worn. "What is this place?" she asked, her voice stronger now. Thomas paused, as if weighing how much to reveal. "My home," he said simply, but his eyes hinted at a deeper truth. The land outside was his, passed down through generations, a place of refuge and reckoning. Clara felt the weight of her own past pressing in, fragments of a life she tried to escape. Debts, betrayal, a man's voice promising retribution. She shivered, not from cold but from the realization that her flight had led her here, to this man, this moment. Thomas watched her, as if he could see the storm within her, and she wondered what secrets he carried, what kept him tethered to this lonely place. The day stretched ahead, quiet but heavy with unspoken questions. The cabin's warmth became a cocoon, shielding Clara from the world beyond its walls. She spent the day regaining strength, her body slowly remembering how to move without pain. Thomas was a constant presence, never intrusive but always there, tending to chores with the rhythm that spoke of years alone. He chopped wood outside, the axe's steady thuds echoing like a heartbeat. Clara watched through the window, her curiosity about him growing. His silence wasn't cold but deliberate, as if words were a currency he spent sparingly. She pieced together what she could of his Apache heritage, evident in the symbols woven into the blankets, the way he moved with the land's rhythm. She asked about his life, and he spoke of the ranch, his family long gone, the cattle he raised to keep the land alive. But there was a shadow in his words, a loss he didn't name. Clara shared fragments of her own story, testing the water cell life in the city, a job that drained her, a man who'd promised love but delivered control. She didn't mention the threats, the reason she'd fled, but Thomas seemed to sense it, his eyes narrowing as if reading her unspoken fears. He showed her a map on the wall, its edges worn, marking the ranch's boundaries and beyond, where the mountains rose like sentinels. "You're safe here," he said, and she wanted to believe him, but the past had a way of following. By afternoon, she felt strong enough to walk, and he led her to the barn where she'd nearly frozen. Inside, it was warmer than she'd expected, hay bales stacked high, a horse snorting softly in its stall. Thomas checked the animal, his hands gentle, and Clara saw a tenderness that contrasted with his rugged exterior. She noticed a locked chest in the corner, its surface carved with the same symbols as the figure in the cabin. "What's in there?" she asked, half expecting him to deflect. He didn't, but his answer was vague. "Memories." The word hung between them, heavy with meaning. Outside, the snow sparkled under the sun, but Clara felt a chill, as if the land itself was watching. She wondered if Thomas was hiding something, or if her own fears were painting shadows where none existed. As they returned to the cabin, the silence between them was different, charged with the weight of things unsaid, a bridge forming between two strangers bound by circumstance. Night fell swiftly, the stars sharp against the black sky, their light filtering through the cabin's window. Clara sat by the fire, her strength returning but her mind restless. Thomas cooked a simple meal of venison and cornbread, the flavors rich and unfamiliar to her city palate. They ate in silence, the crackle of the fire filling the space where words might have been. She studied him, the way his hands moved with purpose, the faint scars on his knuckles telling stories she could only guess at. Her own hands trembled slightly, not from cold but from the weight of her past catching up. She'd run from a man named Victor, his promises of love turning to threats when she tried to leave. His voice echoed in her mind, promising to find her, to make her pay. She pushed the thought away, focusing on the present, on Thomas's quiet strength. He seemed to sense her unease, offering her a small knife from his belt for protection. He said, his tone matter-of-fact. She took it, the weight of it grounding her, though she wondered what he thought she might need protecting from. The cabin felt smaller now, the walls closing in with the weight of their shared silence. Clara asked about the symbols she'd seen, hoping to understand the man who'd saved her. He explained they were Apache, tied to his family's history, meant to guard against spirits and misfortune. His voice softened as he spoke of his grandmother, a medicine woman who'd taught him the old ways. But he stopped short, as if the memories were too heavy to share. Clara felt a pang of guilt for prying, yet her curiosity burned brighter. She noticed a photograph on a shelf, faded and worn, showing a younger Thomas with a woman, their smiles bright but fleeting. "Who's she?" Clara asked, and his face tightened, the first crack in his stoic mask. "Someone gone," he said, and turned away. The air grew thick, the fire's warmth unable to dispel the chill of their pasts. Clara clutched the knife, her mind racing. Could Victor have followed her here? The thought was irrational, yet it gnawed at her. Thomas seemed to sense her fear, his eyes meeting hers with a quiet promise of safety. But as the night deepened, the cabin's walls seemed to whisper, as if the land itself held secrets that neither of them could escape. The next day brought a restless energy, the calm after the storm giving way to a sense of urgency. Clara's strength had returned enough for her to explore the ranch, and Thomas agreed to show her the land. They walked through the snow, the crunch of their boots the only sound in the vast silence. The ranch stretched wide, its fences weathered but sturdy, the cattle grazing in the distance like ghosts against the white. Thomas pointed out the boundaries, his voice steady as he spoke of the land's history, its sacredness to his people. Clara listened, drawn to the way he spoke of the earth as a living thing, something to be honored rather than owned. Yet she sensed a weight in his words, a duty that kept him here, alone. She shared more of her story, the words spilling out of Victor's control, the threats that drove her to flee, the fear that followed her like a shadow. Thomas listened without judgment, his silence a kind of permission to unburden herself. They reached a frozen stream, its surface glinting under the sun, and he showed her how to check the ice's thickness, a skill born of necessity. She felt a flicker of pride as she mimicked his movements, the act grounding her in the present. But her eyes kept drifting to the horizon, half expecting to see a figure watching. Thomas noticed, his hand resting briefly on her shoulder, a gesture that felt like an anchor. "No one comes here uninvited," he said, but his tone held a trace of caution, as if he knew the world could intrude. They returned to the cabin as dusk fell, the air growing sharp. Inside, Clara noticed the locked chest again, its presence nagging at her. She didn't ask about it, sensing it was a line not to cross. Instead, she helped Thomas prepare dinner, their movements falling into an easy rhythm. The knife he'd given her rested on the table, a reminder of her vulnerability and his trust. As they ate, she asked about the ranch's isolation, why he stayed. His answer was simple but heavy, it's home. Yet his eyes betrayed a deeper reason, one tied to the photograph, the symbols, the chest. Clara felt the pull of her own past, the fear that Victor was closer than she dared admit. The night closed in, the cabin a fragile shield against the unknowns that waited beyond its walls. Dawn painted the sky in hues of pink and gold, the ranch bathed in a fleeting warmth. Clara woke to find Thomas gone, his absence leaving the cabin quieter than usual. She found a note had gone to check the cattle, back by noon. The solitude gave her time to think, to piece together the fragments of her memory. She'd been running from Victor for weeks, her savings dwindled to nothing, her desperation leading her to this remote place. The barn had been her last hope, a shelter she'd stumbled upon by chance or fate. She explored the cabin, her fingers tracing the woven blankets, the carved symbols, each one a piece of Thomas's world. The photograph drew her again, the woman's smile hauntingly familiar, though Clara couldn't place why. She resisted the urge to open the locked chest, respecting the boundaries of the man who'd saved her. Outside, the snow sparkled, but the beauty felt deceptive, hiding dangers she couldn't name. She stepped onto the porch, the cold air sharp in her lungs, and scanned the horizon. Nothing moved, yet her heart raced, as if her fear had summoned a threat. She clutched the knife, its weight a small comfort. When Thomas returned, his face was drawn, his eyes scanning the land as if he'd seen something unsettling. "Tracks," he said, his voice low, "not animal." Clara's stomach dropped, her fear of Victor surging. Thomas didn't elaborate, but he checked the cabin's locks, his movements brisk. They spent the day reinforcing the barn, boarding up gaps, his focus calming her racing thoughts. He taught her how to load a rifle, his hand steady over hers, his voice calm but firm. "Just in case," he said, and she nodded, her resolve hardening. As night fell, they sat by the fire, the silence heavier now, charged with the possibility of danger. Clara asked about the tracks, and Thomas admitted they were human, fresh, circling the ranch. "Could be a drifter," he said, but his tone suggested he didn't believe it. She confessed her fear of Victor, the man who'd vowed to find her. Thomas listened, his face unreadable, but his hand rested on the rifle. The cabin felt like a fortress, yet Clara sensed the walls couldn't hold back the past forever. The night stretched on, the fire's glow a fragile barrier against the darkness outside. The tension in the cabin grew, a quiet hum beneath the surface of their routines. Clara and Thomas moved through the day with a shared purpose, checking the ranch's perimeter, securing the barn, and tending the cattle. The tracks Thomas had found lingered in her mind, each crunch of snow under her boots a reminder of the unseen threat. He taught her to read the land, to notice the subtle signs of broken twigs, disturbed snow that could betray an intruder. His knowledge was vast, rooted in his Apache heritage, a blend of instinct and tradition that made her feel both safe and small. She shared more about Victor, the way his charm had masked a controlling nature, how his threats had escalated once she tried to leave. Thomas listened, his silence encouraging her to speak, though he offered little of his own past. The photograph on the shelf seemed to watch them, its presence a silent question. Clara noticed Thomas glancing at it, his expression a mix of grief and resolve. She wanted to ask about the woman, but the locked chest and his guarded demeanor held her back. By afternoon, they found more tracks, closer to the cabin, and Thomas's face darkened. "We're not alone," he said, his voice steady but laced with warning. He showed her a hidden trapdoor in the cabin's floor, a small space stocked with supplies of food, blankets, a lantern. "If it comes to it," he said, and she nodded, her fear tempered by his preparedness. They ate dinner in near silence, the rifle lay within reach, the knife at Clara's side. She asked about the symbols again, hoping to understand the man beside her. He spoke of his grandmother's teachings, of spirits that guarded the land, of a promise to protect it, but his words hinted at a loss, a debt unpaid, tied to the woman in the photograph. Clara felt a connection growing, not just to Thomas but to the land itself, its beauty and danger intertwined. As night fell, the wind picked up, rattling the windows, and Clara's fear of Victor mingled with a new resolve. She wasn't the woman who'd fled the city, not anymore. Thomas seemed to sense the change, his eyes meeting hers with a quiet respect. The cabin held them, a fragile sanctuary, as the night whispered of dangers yet to come. The storm returned with a vengeance, its howl drowning out the world beyond the cabin. Clara and Thomas sat by the fire, the rifle between them, the knife in her hand. The tracks had multiplied, circling closer, and Thomas's vigilance was unwavering. He'd found a scrap of fabric near the barn, torn and unfamiliar, and though he didn't say it, Clara knew he suspected her pursuer. She told him everything now of Victor's rage, his connections, the way he'd tracked her across states. Thomas's face remained calm, but his eyes burned with a quiet fury, as if her story echoed something in his own past. He spoke of the woman in the photograph, his sister, lost to a man who'd promised love but brought only pain. The locked chest held her belongings, a reminder of his failure to protect her. Clara felt the weight of his grief, her own fear mingling with empathy. They planned for the night, setting lanterns to cast light beyond the windows, a warning to whoever lurked outside. The storm's fury masked any sounds, but Thomas's instincts were sharp, his body tense as she listened. Clara gripped the knife, her resolve hardening as she wouldn't be a victim again. As midnight passed, a shadow moved outside, a flicker against the lantern's glow. Thomas was up in an instant, rifle in hand, motioning for Clara to stay low. The door rattled, not from the wind but from a deliberate force. Her heart pounded, Victor's face flashing in her mind, but she steadied herself, trusting Thomas's lead. He opened the door, the storm rushing in, and shouted into the dark, his voice a challenge. No answer came, only the howl of the wind, but the shadow was gone. They secured the cabin, the night stretching on, each creak and gust a test of their nerves. Clara felt a shift, a bond forged in the face of danger, two souls tethered by their pasts and their will to survive. The storm raged, but within the cabin, a quiet strength grew, a promise to face whatever came. As dawn approached, the wind stilled, leaving only silence and the certainty that the threat was closer than ever.